that were broken, and the people who were hurt in the process. And I've had enough. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Amelia pressed on. I've spent my entire life being defined by my connection to these two men, but I refuse to let their choices dictate my future any longer. That's why I'm here, to put an end to this feud once and for all. Victor and Julian exchanged stunned glances, both clearly unprepared for Amelia's bold declaration. Amelia turned her gaze toward them, her voice unwavering. Dad, Julian, this war ends tonight. If you can't see past your own egos, then I'll make sure the world sees the truth about both of you. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Victor or Julian to respond. Victor was the first to speak. Amelia, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she interrupted. I understand that you've both let your hatred for each other consume you, but I won't let it consume me. Julian stepped forward, his expression conflicted. Amelia, I love you. Everything I've done was for yourself, she finished. You may love me, Julian, but you love winning more. His face fell, and the weight of her words hung heavy in the air. In the days following the gala, the fallout was swift. Amelia made good on her promise, sharing evidence of both Victor's and Julian's underhanded tactics with the media. The revelations shook Miami's business world to its core, forcing both men to confront the consequences of their actions. But Amelia didn't stop there. She used the leverage she had gained to broker peace between their companies, ensuring that their rivalry could no longer wreak havoc on the lives of innocent people. It wasn't an easy process, and it required sacrifices from everyone involved. But for the first time in years, there was hope for a new beginning. As for Amelia, she finally found the freedom she had been searching for. She stayed in Miami, but on her own terms, building a life that wasn't defined by her father or Julian. And though the scars of the past would always remain, she knew she had done the right thing. Amelia had taken control of her story, and in doing so, she had found her own kind of revenge. Amelia Torres, the 20-year-old daughter of real estate mogul Victor Torres, had always been the gem of Miami's high society. Known for her sun-kissed complexion, flowing chestnut hair, and an effortless charm that drew people in like a moth to a flame, she led a life most could only dream of. The Torres mansion, perched on the edge of Biscayne Bay, stood as a testament to Victor's immense wealth and ambition. Inside, life was a whirlwind of black-tie galas, private yacht parties, and expensive vacations to the Caribbean. Victor was proud of the empire he had built from scratch. Having grown up in the slums of Havana, he clawed his way to the top of Miami's cutthroat real estate market. But behind his magnetic smile and polished demeanor lay a man fiercely competitive, unwilling to lose, not in business, and certainly not in his personal life. Amelia had grown up idolizing her father, her world revolving around his larger-than-life presence. Yet, despite the wealth and glamour, she often felt stifled under Victor's watchful eye. Her decisions were scrutinized, her freedom curtailed, all in the name of protecting the Torres legacy. Her mother, Elena, had long since faded into the background, a shadow in Victor's orbit. Elena's days were filled with social obligations and silent compliance, a sharp contrast to Amelia's fiery spirit. Amelia yearned for something more, something that wasn't dictated by her father's ambitions or the expectations of high society. Then came the whispers of Victor's fiercest rival, Julian Vega. Where Victor was a self-made tycoon, Julian was a cunning strategist, a man who built his wealth by exploiting the weaknesses of others. The two had clashed repeatedly, each trying to outmaneuver the other in Miami's high-stakes real estate market. To Victor, Julian wasn't just a competitor, he was an enemy who threatened everything he had worked for. For Amelia, however, Julian represented something different. She had seen him once at a gala, his piercing grey eyes meeting hers across the room. There was an air of danger about him, a magnetic pull she couldn't quite resist. He was older, yes, perhaps too old, but there was something intoxicating about the way he carried himself, exuding confidence and charm. It was a chance encounter at a private art gallery that set everything into motion. Amelia, wandering through the sleek, modern space, had been admiring a piece when a deep voice spoke behind her. Beautiful, isn't it? Raw, unfiltered, yet undeniably captivating. She turned to find Julian standing there, his gaze fixed on the same painting. His presence was overwhelming, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Their conversation that evening was electric, a dance of words that left her breathless. Julian spoke of freedom, of living life on one's own terms, a stark contrast to the carefully curated world her father had built for her. It wasn't long before one encounter turned into another, and soon, Amelia found herself drawn into a world she had never known. But there was more to Julian than met the eye. While he was charming and attentive, there was an edge to him that hinted at something darker. Amelia, blinded by her newfound sense of freedom, failed to notice the red flags. She didn't see how carefully orchestrated their meetings were, nor did she question his motives. As their relationship deepened, Amelia began to pull away from her father. Late-night arguments erupted in the Torres mansion, Victor's booming voice echoing through the halls as he demanded answers. Amelia, for the first time, stood her ground, refusing to bend to his will. The cracks in their once perfect world began to show, and the tension within the family grew unbearable. Yet, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she was finally living for herself, breaking free from the gilded cage her father had built around her. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't just stepping out of Victor's shadow, she was walking straight into Julian's web. Victor Torres was a man of precision. Every move he made, whether in business or in his personal life, was calculated for maximum impact. So when he began to notice subtle changes in Amelia, her sudden secrecy, the way her phone seemed glued to her hand, the unspoken defiance in her eyes, he knew something was amiss. At first, he dismissed it as the growing pains of a young woman asserting her independence. But then the rumors began. Whispers reached him through the grapevine of Miami's elite. His daughter had been seen at a secluded beachside cafe with none other than Julian Vega. Victor's blood ran cold. Julian wasn't just a rival, he was the antithesis of everything Victor stood for. Ruthless, cunning, and without a shred of loyalty, Julian was a snake, slithering his way through Miami's elite circles. For years, Victor had fought to keep Julian at bay, thwarting his attempts to undermine the Torres empire. And now, that man had ensnared his daughter. Victor's mind raced as he pieced together the puzzle. Amelia's late-night outings, her sudden interest in art galleries she'd never cared for before, the mysterious smile that played on her lips when she thought no one was watching, it all pointed to Julian. But why? Why would Julian, a man in his late 40s, pursue a young woman barely out of her teens? The answer hit Victor like a freight train. This wasn't about love or attraction, it was about revenge. Julian was using Amelia to humiliate him, to strike at the very core of his pride and legacy. Determined to uncover the truth, Victor began to investigate. He hired private investigators to trail Amelia, their cameras capturing every clandestine meeting, every stolen kiss. The photos, when delivered, confirmed his worst fears. There was Amelia, sitting across from Julian at a dimly lit restaurant, her eyes alight with excitement as she leaned closer to him. Victor's rage was volcanic, but he knew better than to confront Amelia directly. She was headstrong, and any attempt to force her hand would only push her further into Julian's grasp. No, he needed a plan, something that would expose Julian for the manipulative opportunist he was while protecting Amelia from the fallout. Meanwhile, Amelia remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Julian had become her escape, a refuge from the suffocating expectations of her father. He listened to her dreams, encouraged her ambitions, and made her feel like more than just Victor Torres' daughter. But there were moments when doubt crept in, fleeting but persistent. Julian's charm sometimes felt rehearsed, his answers too polished, too perfect. And then there were the phone calls he took in hushed tones, his face unreadable. Amelia tried to brush off her concerns, telling herself that everyone had secrets. After all, hadn't she kept their relationship a secret from her father? Julian, for his part, played his role masterfully. He showered Amelia with attention, whisking her away to hidden corners of Miami where they wouldn't be recognized. He painted himself as a misunderstood man, vilified by her father for daring to challenge the status quo. But beneath the facade, Julian was calculating his next move. He knew that Victor would eventually discover their relationship, he was counting on it. The question wasn't if Victor would react, but how. One evening, as Amelia and Julian strolled along the shoreline of a private beach, she noticed a shadow of tension in his demeanor. "What's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowing in concern. Julian hesitated, then sighed, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. "It's your father," he admitted. "He's been making moves to shut me out of the market. I didn't want to burden you with this, but it's getting harder to fight back." Amelia's heart sank. She had no love for the cutthroat side of her father's business, but she couldn't deny his influence. "What can I do?" she asked, desperation lacing her voice. Julian shook his head, his expression somber. "You don't need to do anything, Amelia. Just being with you gives me the strength to keep going." It was a masterstroke of manipulation, and Amelia fell for it completely. That night, as she lay in bed, she resolved to confront her father not about Julian, but about his relentless pursuit of dominance. Victor, however, was already 10 steps ahead. He had been waiting for the right moment to act, and now, with Amelia's emotions fully entangled, he knew the time had come. At breakfast the next morning, he casually mentioned Julian's name, watching Amelia's reaction closely. Her fork paused midway to her mouth, her eyes widening ever so slightly before she recovered. "What about him?" she asked, feigning disinterest. Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I've heard some interesting things about him lately. It seems he's been spending time with someone close to me." Amelia's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Is that so? Well, maybe he's not as bad as you think." Victor's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps. But you know what they say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer." The tension in the room was palpable, and Amelia excused herself, retreating to her room to text Julian. "He knows. We need to be careful." Julian's reply came swiftly. "Don't worry, he's playing a game, but we're ahead of him. Trust me." But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. Victor Torres had built his empire on strategy and control, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment he would confront his daughter about her involvement with Julian Vega. The day began like any other, a bright Miami morning, the sun glinting off the waters of Biscayne Bay. But inside the Torres mansion, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Victor sat at the head of the long, polished dining table, his coffee untouched. Across from him, Amelia picked at her fruit salad, her appetite dulled by the growing unease in her chest. She hadn't told Julian about her father's subtle warning at breakfast the day before. Something in Victor's tone had left her feeling exposed, as though he already knew far more than he was letting on. Finally, Victor broke the silence. "Amelia," he began, his voice deceptively calm, "we need to talk." She glanced up, her heart pounding. "About what?" Victor set his coffee cup down with deliberate precision, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "About Julian Vega. And about the lies you've been telling me." The blood drained from Amelia's face. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, an explanation that could pacify her father without betraying Julian. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Don't insult my intelligence, Amelia. I know everything. The private investigators, the photos, the phone records, I have it all. So spare me the denials and tell me the truth." Amelia's hands clenched in her lap. She had always known this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it to feel so suffocating. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "Julian isn't who you think he is." Victor's jaw tightened, his composure beginning to crack. "Don't you dare defend him," he hissed. "That man is a snake, and you've let him slither his way into your life and into mine." Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You don't know him," she shot back. "You only see him as your rival, but he's more than that. He listens to me, respects me, something you've never done." Victor's hand slammed down on the table, the sound echoing through the cavernous dining room. "I've given you everything, Amelia. Everything. And this is how you repay me, by throwing your lot in with a man who would see our family destroyed." The raw fury in his voice sent a chill down Amelia's spine, but she refused to back down. "Maybe I don't want to be part of this family anymore," she said, her voice rising. "Maybe I'm tired of living in your shadow, following your rules, being the perfect daughter in your perfect little world." Victor stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and hurt. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said finally, his voice cold and measured. "Julian doesn't care about you, Amelia. He's using you to get to me. This isn't love, it's manipulation." "And how do you know that?" she demanded. "Because you can't imagine someone wanting me for who I am, instead of what I represent." Victor shook his head, his frustration mounting. I know Julian Vega better than you do. I know how he operates, how he twists people to serve his own ends. And I know that if you stay with him, he will destroy you. Amelia rose from her seat, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't get to decide who I love, she said fiercely. Not you, not anyone. Victor stood as well, his towering presence a stark contrast to her smaller frame. I'm not trying to control you, Amelia. I'm trying to protect you. But if you walk out that door and go back to him, you'll leave me no choice but to destroy him myself. Her eyes widened in shock. What does that mean? She demanded. Victor didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, her mind racing with fear and confusion. Amelia fled to her room, her hands shaking as she dialed Julian's number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice smooth and reassuring. Amelia, what's wrong? It's my father, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. He knows about us. He's threatening to destroy you, Julian. I don't know what to do. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Julian spoke again, his tone was calm but firm. Listen to me, Amelia. He's bluffing. Victor is a businessman, not a fighter. He won't risk his reputation by going after me directly. But what if he does? She asked, her voice breaking. He won't, Julian assured her. And even if he tries, I'll handle it. Trust me. Amelia wanted to believe him, but something in her father's eyes during their confrontation told her this was no bluff. Victor was a man who always followed through on his threats. Later that night, as the mansion fell silent, Victor sat in his study, poring over the dossier his investigators had compiled on Julian. Every shady deal, every betrayal, every skeleton in Julian's closet was laid bare before him. Victor's lips curled into a grim smile. If Julian Vega wants to play games, he muttered to himself, then let's play. He picked up his phone and dialed a number, his voice cold and commanding as he spoke. I need a meeting with the mayor. Tell him. It's urgent. Victor wasn't just planning to destroy Julian's reputation, he was going to dismantle his entire empire, piece by piece. The next morning, Amelia woke with a sense of foreboding she couldn't shake. Her father's words from the night before echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. You'll leave me no choice but to destroy him myself. She had always known Victor Torres was a man who kept his promises, but this was different. This wasn't about a business rival or a competitive edge, it was personal. She couldn't sit still, pacing her room as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Julian, for all his charm and confidence, had no idea what he was up against. Victor wasn't just a businessman, he was a force of nature. When cornered, he didn't just fight back, he annihilated his enemies. Amelia tried calling Julian, but her calls went unanswered. A pit formed in her stomach. What if Victor has already done something? She couldn't wait. Grabbing her keys, she rushed out of the mansion, ignoring the wary glance of the housekeeper as she slammed the door behind her. The drive to Julian's penthouse was a blur. Her thoughts raced, alternating between anger at her father and fear for Julian. When she arrived, she hurried up to his suite, her heart pounding. The door opened, and there he was, calm as ever, a glass of whiskey in his hand. But his usual confidence was replaced with something darker, a shadow of tension that hadn't been there before. Julian, she said, stepping inside. Why didn't you answer my calls? He set the glass down and gestured for her to sit. I've been busy, he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his unease. Your father's made his first move. Her breath caught. What do you mean? What did he do? Julian leaned back against the couch, rubbing his temples. This morning, the city inspectors showed up at 3 of my properties. Code violations, they said. Completely fabricated, of course, but it'll take weeks to sort out. And that's just the start. Amelia's heart sank. I'm so sorry, she said, tears welling up. This is my fault. I should have stopped him. He interrupted her, taking her hand. This isn't your fault, Amelia. Your father is doing what he does best, playing dirty. But I've been in this game long enough to know how to fight back. His words were meant to reassure her, but they only deepened her anxiety. This wasn't just a fight between two men, it was a war, and she was caught in the middle. Back at the mansion, Victor was already several steps ahead. He had mobilized every resource at his disposal, leveraging his connections with city officials, banks, and even the media. He didn't just want to cripple Julian's business, he wanted to obliterate his reputation. By evening, rumors were already swirling in Miami's elite circles. Julian Vega's name was being whispered in hushed tones, his alleged crimes the subject of endless speculation. Victor knew how to play the long game, and he was betting that the court of public opinion would deal a blow that Julian couldn't recover from. But Amelia wasn't blind to her father's tactics. She could see the toll it was taking on Julian, even if he tried to hide it. His once certain demeanor was beginning to crack, and the weight of Victor's vendetta was wearing him down. One night, as they sat on the balcony of Julian's penthouse, staring out at the glittering Miami skyline, Amelia broke the silence. "Maybe we should leave," she said softly. Julian turned to her, his brow furrowed. "Leave? What do you mean?" "Miami, all of this," she said, gesturing vaguely. "We could go somewhere else, start over. Somewhere my father can't reach us." Julian's jaw tightened. "Running away isn't an option, Amelia. If I leave now, your father wins. And I can't let that happen." "But at what cost?" she asked, her voice breaking. "He's not going to stop, Julian. You know that. And I can't stand the thought of you getting hurt because of me." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "I'm not afraid of your father," he said firmly. "I've dealt with men like him before. He thinks he's untouchable, but everyone has a weakness, even Victor Torres." Amelia's stomach churned. She didn't like the way Julian said those last words, the hint of something darker lurking beneath his resolve. In the days that followed, the tension escalated. Victor's attacks became more brazen, and Julian retaliated in kind. He began leaking damaging information about Victor's business dealings to the press, painting him as a corrupt mogul who exploited the system to maintain his empire. The media frenzy that ensued only fueled the fire, turning the feud into a public spectacle. Amelia found herself torn between two worlds, each demanding her loyalty. At night, she cried herself to sleep, overwhelmed by guilt and fear. She loved Julian, but she couldn't ignore the part of her that still cared for her father. It all came to a head one fateful evening. Victor had called a press conference, ostensibly to address the allegations against him. Amelia watched from Julian's penthouse, her heart in her throat as her father took the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, his voice steady and commanding, "I have dedicated my life to building a legacy not just for myself, but for my family and this city. Recent attacks on my character are nothing more than the desperate attempts of a man who has no integrity, no honor, and no future." Amelia's chest tightened as she realized where this was going. Victor continued, his gaze piercing. "Julian Vega is not just my rival, he is a fraud, a criminal who preys on the weak to serve his own selfish ambitions. And now, he has stooped so low as to manipulate my daughter in his quest to destroy me." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. Julian, who had been standing beside her, clenched his fists, his jaw tightening in rage. "This ends now," Victor declared, his voice echoing with finality. "I will not stand by and let this man ruin my family or my legacy." Victor's words set off a chain reaction that neither he nor Amelia could have anticipated. The media swarmed, eager to uncover every detail of the scandal. Amelia became a reluctant centerpiece in the drama, her every move scrutinized by tabloids and social media alike. For the first time, she began to question everything. Was Julian truly the man she thought he was? Or was her father right about him all along? And as the storm raged on, one question lingered in her mind. Was there any way to escape the chaos, or was she doomed to be a pawn in this war forever? The days following Victor's press conference were a blur for Amelia. Reporters camped outside Julian's penthouse and the Torres mansion, eager for a glimpse of the daughter in the middle of Miami's most explosive rivalry. Every time Amelia turned on the TV or scrolled through her phone, her name was splashed across headlines, heiress torn between love and loyalty or Julian Vega's dangerous game. The relentless attention gnawed at her, but what haunted her most were the seeds of doubt her father had planted. Could Julian really be using her? She sat alone in Julian's living room one evening, the Miami skyline glittering beyond the glass walls. Julian had stepped out to take a call, and his laptop sat open on the coffee table. A notification popped up on the screen, an email from someone named Diego Carranza with the subject line, Phase 2, Updates. Amelia hesitated, her heart pounding. She knew it was wrong to snoop, but the nagging doubt refused to let her rest. Against her better judgment, she clicked on the email. Amelia's hands trembled as she read the words again, her stomach churning. Don't let the girl get in the way. Was this what her father had warned her about? Had Julian been using her as a pawn to bring Victor down all along? She snapped the laptop shut just as Julian walked back into the room. His smile faltered when he saw the look on her face. Amelia, what's wrong? Her mind raced, but she couldn't hide the truth. Who's Diego Carranza? She demanded, her voice shaking. Julian's expression darkened. Where did you hear that name? I saw the email, she admitted, standing up to face him. He said not to let me get in the way. What does that mean, Julian? Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. Amelia, it's not what you think. Then explain it to me, she interrupted, her voice rising. Because right now, it looks like you've been using me to get to my father. He stepped closer, his tone softening. I would never hurt you, Amelia. Yes, I've been fighting back against your father. He started this war, not me. But my feelings for you are real. You have to believe that. She stared at him, her heart breaking. How can I believe you when everything I've seen says otherwise? That night, Amelia left the penthouse. She needed space to think, to process everything that had happened. She drove aimlessly through the streets of Miami, the city lights blurring as tears filled her eyes. She ended up at the beach, parking her car and walking barefoot along the sand. The sound of the waves was soothing, but it couldn't quiet the storm inside her. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Julian doesn't care about you. He's using you to get to me. And then Julian's. My feelings for you are real. She didn't know who to trust anymore. The next morning, Amelia returned to the Torres mansion, feeling like a prodigal daughter. Victor was waiting for her in his study, a rare look of relief crossing his face when she walked in. I was beginning to think you'd never come back, he said. Amelia sat down across from him, her expression unreadable. I need to know the truth, she said. About Julian. About all of this. Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. What do you want to know? Was Julian always your enemy, or did something happen between you two? Victor sighed, his gaze distant. It's more complicated than that. Julian and I were partners once. Years ago, before you were born. We built something great together, but greed got the better of him. He betrayed me. Amelia stole clients, undermined contracts, and left me to clean up the mess. Amelia's heart sank. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted to protect you, Victor said. I didn't want you to grow up hating someone you might never meet. But when I saw you with him, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. She studied her father's face, searching for any sign of deception, but all she saw was pain. Do you think he ever cared about me? She asked softly. Victor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I think Julian Vega cares about winning, and if he had to hurt you to do that, he wouldn't think twice. Amelia spent the next few days avoiding Julian's calls and texts. She needed time to process everything she had learned, but as the silence between them stretched on, she began to wonder if Julian had given up on her altogether. It wasn't until a week later that he showed up at the Torres mansion, demanding to see her. Victor tried to block him at the door, but Amelia intervened. I'll talk to him, she said, stepping outside. Julian looked haggard, his usual polished appearance undone by sleepless nights and mounting pressure. Amelia, he began, his voice raw, I know you're angry, and I don't blame you. But I need you to hear me out. She crossed her arms, keeping her distance. I'm listening. Julian took a deep breath. Yes, I've been fighting your father. And yes, I've made mistakes. But everything I've done was because I wanted to build something better for us. Better, she echoed bitterly. By tearing my family apart? I didn't mean for it to go this far, he admitted. But Victor left me no choice. He's been trying to destroy me for years, and I couldn't just stand by and let him win. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. And what about me, Julian? Was I just another piece of your plan? His expression softened, and he stepped closer. No, he said firmly. You were the one thing I didn't plan for. The one thing I never expected to find in all of this. I love you, Amelia. Her heart ached at his words, but the doubts lingered. Could she really trust him after everything that had happened? Amelia stood on the front steps of the Torres mansion, Julian's words echoing in her mind. I love you, Amelia. She had dreamt of hearing those words from him, but now they felt tainted, weighed down by the chaos surrounding them. Julian waited for her response, his eyes pleading. but she couldn't give him an answer, not yet. "I need time," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian nodded, his jaw tightening. "Take all the time you need, but please, don't shut me out. I can't lose you." As he turned and walked back to his car, Amelia felt an ache deep in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his feelings were genuine, but the storm of lies and manipulation surrounding them made it impossible to see clearly. Inside the mansion, Victor was waiting. He stood in the shadows of his study, watching through the window as Julian drove away. "He's persistent, I'll give him that," Victor said as Amelia entered the room. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it. "He says he loves me." Victor turned, his expression unreadable. "Of course he does. It's a convenient way to keep you on his side." Amelia frowned. "You don't know that." "I know Julian Vega," Victor said, his voice cold. "Better than you ever could. He doesn't care about anyone but himself." Amelia's chest tightened. "And what about you, Dad? Do you care about anyone but yourself? Or am I just another piece in your game?" Victor flinched as if she'd struck him. For a moment, the mask of control slipped, and Amelia saw something raw in his eyes: pain, guilt, maybe even regret. "I've made mistakes," he admitted, his voice softer now. "But everything I've done was to protect you, to give you the life you deserve." Amelia shook her head, tears welling up. "All you've done is push me away. You and Julian are so obsessed with destroying each other that you don't care who gets hurt in the process." Victor stepped closer, his expression earnest. "That's not true. You're my daughter, Amelia. You're the only thing that matters to me." She turned away, unable to look at him. "Then prove it," she said quietly. "Let this go. End the feud." Victor's silence was deafening. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty. Amelia stayed at the mansion, avoiding both Julian and Victor as she wrestled with her thoughts. She spent hours walking along the sprawling estate's gardens, replaying every conversation, every memory, searching for answers. She thought about Julian's warmth, his charm, the way he made her feel alive. But she also couldn't ignore the email she had read or the whispers of doubt planted by her father. And then there was Victor, the man who had raised her, protected her, and built an empire to secure their future. Yet his ruthless tactics and inability to let go of his grudge had caused more pain than he seemed willing to admit. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amelia made her decision. She couldn't live like this anymore, trapped between two men determined to destroy each other. She had to take control of her own life, even if it meant walking away from both of them. She found Victor in his study, reviewing documents with a scowl. "Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Victor looked up, surprised. "Amelia, what is it?" She took a deep breath. "I'm leaving." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean, leaving?" "Leaving where?" "Miami," she said. "I can't do this anymore. The fighting, the lies, the manipulation, it's tearing me apart. I need to get away and figure out who I am without all of this." Victor's expression hardened. "You don't have to go anywhere. Stay here, and I'll handle everything." She shook her head. "That's the problem, Dad. You think you can fix everything, but all you're doing is making it worse. I love you, but I can't be a part of this war anymore." Victor stood, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "If you leave, you're playing right into Julian's hands. Don't you see that?" "This isn't about Julian," she said firmly. "It's about me, and if you really care about me, you'll let me go." That night, Amelia packed her bags and booked a flight to New York. She didn't tell Julian or anyone else where she was going. She needed a clean break, a fresh start. As she boarded the plane, she felt a mix of relief and sadness. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was making a choice for herself. Victor sat alone in his study, staring at the empty glass in his hand. He replayed Amelia's words over and over in his mind. "If you really care about me, you'll let me go." For the first time in years, he questioned whether his relentless pursuit of revenge was worth the cost. He had built an empire, but at what expense? Julian, meanwhile, was left in the dark. He called Amelia's phone repeatedly, only to be met with voicemail. When he drove to the Torres mansion, the staff informed him she was gone. Gone where? And for how long? The chill of New York's January air bit at Amelia's cheeks as she stepped out of her rented apartment. The city was a stark contrast to Miami's tropical heat, but the bustling streets, the anonymity, and the fresh start gave her a sense of liberation she hadn't felt in years. It had been 2 weeks since she left Miami, and though the pain of leaving her old life behind still lingered, she was determined to rebuild herself. She found a modest job at a small art gallery in Soho, far removed from the high-stakes business world of her father or Julian. It was quiet, unassuming work, and for the first time, she felt like she could breathe. Her days were filled with arranging exhibits, talking to artists, and watching strangers wander through the gallery. It was a small slice of peace she desperately needed. But at night, when the city quieted and she was left alone in her tiny apartment, the memories crept in. She thought about Julian, his laughter, his confidence, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. Was his love genuine, or had it all been part of a calculated game? And then there was her father. Victor had always been her protector, the towering figure who made her feel safe. But his obsession with Julian, his inability to let go of the past, had made her question everything she thought she knew about him. One evening, as she closed up the gallery, Amelia noticed a familiar face among the remaining patrons. A tall, middle-aged woman with a sharp sense of style lingered near a painting, her piercing blue eyes scanning the artwork before turning toward Amelia. "Amelia Torres," the woman said with a small smile, her voice carrying a confident edge. Amelia froze. "Do I know you?" The woman extended her hand. "Marta Delgado. I work in real estate, but let's just say I've been keeping an eye on Miami's most intriguing family saga." Amelia hesitated, her instincts telling her to keep her guard up. "What do you want?" Marta leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "I want to help you. You've been caught in the middle of a war that's gone on far too long, and I think you're the only one who can end it." Amelia frowned. "Why would you care about that?" "Let's just say I have a vested interest in seeing Miami's power dynamics shift," Marta replied cryptically. "But this isn't about me. It's about you. You've spent your life being pulled between two men who claim to care about you but are more focused on their own agendas. Don't you think it's time to take control?" Amelia's heart raced. The woman's words struck a nerve, echoing the doubts she'd been wrestling with since she left Miami. "I don't know how to end it," Amelia admitted. Marta smiled knowingly. "Oh, I think you do. You just need a little guidance." Over the next few weeks, Marta became an unlikely confidant. She shared stories about Miami's business world, offering Amelia a perspective she had never seen before, one where power wasn't just about wealth or influence, but about understanding people's motivations and using them to your advantage. "You're more like your father than you realize," Marta said one evening over coffee. Amelia shook her head. "I don't want to be like him." "Then be better," Marta challenged. "Learn from his mistakes. Use what you know about him and Julian to turn the tables. They've been fighting over you like you're a trophy, but you're more than that. You're the key to their downfall." Amelia wasn't sure if she wanted revenge, but the idea of taking control of her life, of no longer being a pawn in their feud, was intoxicating. Meanwhile, back in Miami, Victor and Julian were unraveling in their own ways. Victor threw himself into work, expanding his empire and solidifying his power in an attempt to distract himself from Amelia's absence. But late at night, when he sat alone in the vast emptiness of the mansion, he couldn't escape the guilt gnawing at him. Julian, on the other hand, became consumed with finding her. He hired private investigators, scoured social media, and even made public appeals through the press, but Amelia remained a ghost. The rivalry between the two men intensified in her absence. Victor saw Julian's desperation as a weakness to exploit, while Julian blamed Victor for driving Amelia away. The tension spilled over into the business world, with deals falling apart and alliances crumbling as both men tried to outmaneuver each other. Amelia watched it all unfold from afar. The headlines chronicled every twist and turn, and though she tried to stay detached, a part of her couldn't help but feel responsible. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reading yet another article about the escalating feud, Marta's words came back to her. "You're the key to their downfall." Amelia realized she had a choice to make. She could continue hiding, hoping the storm would eventually pass, or she could step back into the fray and take control of the narrative. She chose the latter. Amelia stepped off the plane at Miami International Airport, the warm tropical air wrapping around her like a reminder of everything she had left behind. But she wasn't the same woman who had fled weeks ago. The timid, unsure version of herself had been replaced by someone sharper, stronger, someone who understood the power of control and the value of leverage. Her plan was clear. If Victor and Julian wanted to treat her like a pawn in their game, she would become the queen. And a queen always dictated the terms. The first move came 2 days after her arrival, when she walked into her father's office unannounced. Victor was in the middle of a meeting with his legal team, but the sight of Amelia standing in the doorway froze him mid-sentence. "Everyone out," Victor commanded, his voice trembling. The lawyers exchanged glances but quickly obeyed, filing out of the room and leaving father and daughter alone. "Amelia," Victor said, standing. "You're back." She nodded, stepping further into the room. "I am. But not for the reasons you think." Victor frowned, his excitement fading. "What do you mean?" "I came back to fix the mess you and Julian created," she said, her voice firm. "This war ends now." Victor's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple. Julian isn't the problem," she interrupted. "You are. Both of you are so consumed by your egos that you've forgotten what's at stake. But I haven't." Victor stared at her, his expression unreadable. "And what exactly do you plan to do?" Amelia leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "You'll see, but if you try to stop me, I'll make sure you lose everything." Her next stop was Julian's penthouse. When the door opened, Julian's expression shifted from shock to relief. "Amelia," he breathed, pulling her into an embrace. She stiffened in his arms, and he quickly released her, sensing her hesitation. "You disappeared," he said, his voice tinged with hurt. "I thought I'd lost you." "You did," she replied bluntly, stepping past him into the living room. "But I'm giving you one last chance to prove me wrong." Julian followed her, confusion etched across his face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth, Julian," she said, turning to face him. "No more games, no more manipulation. If you want me in your life, you'll have to earn it." Julian's jaw tightened. "I never meant to hurt you, Amelia." "Maybe not," she said, her voice softening. "But you did. And now you'll have to live with the consequences." Over the next week, Amelia set her plan in motion. She began meeting with key players in Miami's business world: investors, contractors, and politicians, people who had ties to both Victor and Julian. Using everything she had learned from Marta, she carefully positioned herself as a neutral party, someone who could broker peace between the two rivals. At first, many were skeptical, but Amelia's charm, intelligence, and determination quickly won them over. It didn't hurt that she had access to inside information about both Victor and Julian, thanks to years of being privy to their secrets. Her ultimate goal was to dismantle the toxic rivalry that had consumed her life. To do that, she needed to expose the truth about both men, their shady deals, their manipulations, and the collateral damage they had caused. The opportunity came during a high-profile charity gala hosted by one of Miami's wealthiest families. Both Victor and Julian were in attendance, along with nearly every influential figure in the city. Amelia arrived in a sleek black gown, her head held high. Whispers followed her as she made her way through the crowd. Everyone knew who she was and the drama that surrounded her. She waited until the evening was in full swing before making her move. The gala's host, an old friend of Victor's, introduced Amelia as the keynote speaker, a surprise addition to the program. As she stepped onto the stage, all eyes turned to her, including Victor's and Julian's. "Good evening," Amelia began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Many of you know me as the daughter of Victor Torres, or the woman caught in the middle of Miami's most infamous feud. But tonight, I want to tell you who I really am and why I'm here." She paused, letting the tension build. "For years, I've watched my father and Julian Vega tear each other apart. I've seen the deals that were sabotaged, the alliances,